Good to go. I will call to order the special council meeting for March 1st, number 1556. Pursuant to section 10 of council procedure bylaw 788, this meeting will be held electronically and all members of council and staff will be attending via electronic means. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. The recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. In honor of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Antonelli. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then a motion to go in camera, please. Councillor Craddock, second by Councillor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. We're good to go.
Okay, thank you. So I'll call to order this committee of the whole for Tuesday, March 1st, number 225. Pursuant to section 10A of council procedure bylaw 788, this meeting will be held electronically and all members of council and staff will be attending via electronic means. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. The recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. In honor of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant. Any opposed? Motion carries. And we're going to go right into the main event and welcome some staff. There we go, starting to arrive. Excellent. Is anybody else joining us?
That's all.
All right. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're here to talk about our community climate action plan. This is a strategic priority of this council, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to hear your presentation. So I will turn it over to Ms. Pedrini, our OCP planner, and Ms. Jenkins, our climate solution specialist. Turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I am also very excited to be here this morning to present the draft plan to you. And so I'll just ask Gwendolyn if she could start the PowerPoint, please. Great. All right. So this is a very momentous day for me. I've been working quite a while on this and very happy to be at the stage now to have a draft plan. I just wanted to remind Mayor and Council, or Committee of the Whole, sorry, that the village has already taken some key initiatives to support climate action, including implementing the STEP code into our building bylaw, as well as applying for grant funding for electric vehicle charging stations that we are waiting to hear on, and creating a master plan to promote community agriculture. So next slide, please. So the purpose of today's meeting is to present the draft plan and seek your feedback before it will be presented to council for consideration of adoption. And here's an agenda of what the slideshow today will cover. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So this slide, I know that Committee of the Whole has seen before, but it is important and it bears repeating that this plan addresses mitigation and not adaptation. Although we do recommend that adaptation be one of the next key initiatives that the village takes on. And I understand from talking with the SLRD Climate Action and Resilience Specialists that there is some opportunity to do some regional work with the SLRD on adaptation. So as I mentioned, the plan focuses on territorial emissions, or those emissions that are created right here in Pemberton. And they're mainly created through transportation, buildings, and waste. So the Community Climate Action Plan focuses on what the Village of Pemberton can do, given its local tools and authorities, to help community members and local businesses lessen their climate impact. The plan does not cover consumptive emissions because these are emissions that the local government just simply doesn't have great influence over. So the plan focuses on community-wide actions that the village can take, and part of that is our corporate emissions. The village has obviously direct impact over the creation of corporate emissions, but the percentage of corporate emissions is only a very small amount of what our community at large creates. So we can move to the next slide, please. So this slide basically displays the process. I'm sorry if you can't read this, it's the font is quite small, but this basically displays the process that was undertaken to develop the Community Climate Action Plan. So key village staff and stakeholders worked together with the Community Energy Association to explore our current inventory of energy emissions and energy costs. And together we were able to set GHG, or greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, determine a vision for our community in the future by backcasting our desired future. And we are also able to use forecasting to determine the amount of emissions we would create if nothing was done, and then modeling the extent that we could reduce emissions if we undertook the actions outlaid in this plan. We then hosted a public information meeting, and we launched a community climate action survey to receive input from the residents on priority action items before drafting the plan. Once our draft plan was in place, we had key community stakeholders review it and give us feedback, and staff also had a look at it and reviewed and gave feedback before it was presented to Committee of the Whole today. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, by utilizing backcasting, which is a planning approach that starts by defining the future vision before working backwards to identify and prioritize creative solutions to reach that desired future, we created a low carbon vision of Pemberton in 2040. So that vision sees Pemberton having reduced emissions by more than 50%, resulting in clean, fresh air, clean water, and a healthy, thriving ecosystem. We would be seeing less congestion. There would be more people walking, biking, using micro e-mobility or e-scooters, and driving zero emission vehicles and taking transit. Most homes would be built with low carbon materials such as wood, and they would have less concrete, which means less embodied carbon. And there would be more shared housing arrangements and more shared spaces throughout the village. Almost all of our waste would be diverted from landfill, and we would be composting all organics and using that compost to grow most of our food locally. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we basically present the greenhouse gas reduction targets that were determined by our key community stakeholders. And what we are envisioning is achieving a reduction of greenhouse gases from 50% of the 2007 levels by 2030. And yes, I realize that is within the next 8 years, so it is ambitious, but as the plan will show, it is doable. And having net zero or 100% reduction from 2007 levels by 2015. These targets are in line with surrounding municipalities, and they're also in line with the International Panel on Climate Change's recommendation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the neighboring communities have similar targets, and I just wanted to remind Committee of the Whole what those are. So for the District of Squamish, They are looking to reduce their community emissions from 45% of their 2010 levels and working to achieve net zero by 2050. And from the resort municipality of Whistler, they did a climate action big move strategy in 2020, which would see them committing to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by 50% below 2000 levels by 2030 as well. So similar to what Pemberton is proposing, or what staff is proposing, we mention in our targets. So next slide, please. So this slide basically just tries to give a better idea of what the village can do, or how we have influence over local emissions. So local governments have higher influence over the reduction of certain greenhouse gas emissions more than others. So as the image shows, our highest level of influence would be over the village's own municipal infrastructure, buildings, and fleet. And while it is important to lead by example, as I already mentioned, we do have a greenhouse gas reduction strategy in place for the village. I think it's something that we should be re-looking at, reviewing, and maybe updating. However, this plan is more about what the village can do to help lessen the greenhouse gas emissions for the community at large. So those items that are circled in red are the main focus of the Community Climate Action Plan. It's because those are the items that have the greatest impact, as well as having village influence. So we have influence over these items like the transportation network, land use patterns, building efficiency standards, etc., by utilizing the tools within our toolbox as a local government, as authorized by the Local Government Act and the Community Charter. So for example, we have the authority to set policy and pass regulations that can help shape low carbon choices for residents and businesses. And I'll just give the example of the cycling network plan. That was a policy that council adopted. And we also have the authority to offer infrastructure that enables low carbon choices. So again, using that same example, we have the ability to ensure that sidewalks and bike lanes that make cycling for all ages and abilities a safe and viable choice for commuting is within our influence. And we also have the ability to engage with the community and communicate to the public in a way that supports low carbon choices. So next slide, please. So here we introduce Pemberton's 6 big moves. And like many local governments, this plan utilizes the concept of the big moves, which are associated objectives, strategies, and actions organized by sectors. And those sectors, in our case, are transportation, which is vitally important because 58% of our current emissions are from passenger vehicles and 25% are from commercial vehicles. Buildings, which creates 7% of our overall community emissions, for residential buildings, and 1% from commercial and small and medium industry buildings, and over waste, which creates about 9% of our community's emissions. And when I say community, I mean within the Village of Pemberton boundaries. I'm not talking about, unfortunately, the entire Area C area. This community action plan is focused on what's happening within the Village of Pemberton boundaries. So, and it's good to mention that we don't actually have a landfill, but with 9% of our emissions created by the decomposition of organic waste in landfill, that's directly related to the waste that we create within our village and then is sent to other landfills. So any organic waste would be creating methane, which is a greenhouse gas. So I think I've already mentioned this, but the concept of the big moves is a framework that both the District of Squamish and the Resort Municipality and many other local governments have embraced in similar community climate action strategies. Next slide, please. I don't want to get into a lot of detail about the inventory and modeling. And if you have questions, Allison, who is here today, and will be able to answer those more technical aspects. But I just wanted to mention that the inventory modeling demonstrates where we would be if we did not implement any of the actions recommended in the Community Climate Action Plan. So basically, the red line in this chart shows our target and shows that we would not be able to hit any of our targets either in 2030 or in 2050 if we continue with a business as usual approach. Next slide, please. On the other side, however, if all big moves are implemented to the degree outlined in the Community Climate Action Plan, the Village of Pemberton will nearly meet its 2030 target. And although the 2050 emissions reduction target is not met, as shown on this chart, it is anticipated that new technologies will become available, and these will be supported by clear government policy requirements for adoption, which will close the gap. It's also recommended that we update the Community Climate Action Plan in 5 years or so in order to remain relevant and on track, especially as 2030 is such a key year in terms of many of the targets that are being set by many local governments. The plan itself might not need a full update, perhaps just a tweak to some of the actions that would come up as a result of provincial government policy changes, basically changes that we're just not able to anticipate at this time. Next slide, please. So now we're going to dive into a bit detail on the action plan itself. Next slide. Oh, goodness. Is there a next slide, Gwendolyn? This one's meant to be at the very bottom.
No.
Oh, goodness. Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'll just speak to them. So in terms of transportation, we have a 2050 vision of a complete zero emissions transportation system that connects our communities and regions. And the two strategies under transportation are shift beyond the car, which basically means encouraging active and accessible transportation and transit, and electrified passenger transportation, which is to accelerate the adoption of zero emission vehicles. Our next big move focuses on buildings, and our 2050 vision for buildings is that our community's buildings are exceptionally energy efficient and powered, heated, and cooled with 100% renewable energy, and that we step up new buildings, basically enhance energy efficiency and low carbon heating in new buildings, and that we decarbonize existing buildings. In other words, support deep energy retrofits and fuel switching. If you just give me 1 minute, I'll see if I can resend my PowerPoint to Gwendolyn to be able to.
I do have that full PowerPoint, I believe.
Oh, okay.
So let me just.
So I am on just about to go to slide 19.
Okay, let me just.
And it's nearly finished, just to let you know.
Is everybody seeing?
Yeah, you're showing the notes pages. So you'd want to go to slideshow. Yep. And from, yeah, you can go to the beginning, but you'll have to, yeah.
Page 19. Oh. No, it's not. It shows up. It shows up, and then it jumps right to slide 626.
Okay, why don't you just leave it on this slide,
okay.
And I'll just speak to it.
Can you just tell us what page it's on? We have it all on our.
I didn't actually share the PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, within your agenda package, but I'm happy to share it afterwards. I'm sorry, I was still working on it until late last night. Anyways, we're on waste now. So our 2050 vision for waste is that our community diverts all organic waste, such as food scraps and yard trimmings, from landfills and recovers value from everything that enters the waste stream. And the action or the strategy under that big move is called Close the Loop on Waste. There is other opportunities that the village can implement as part of the community climate action that are in respect to local renewables, sequestration, and local food production. And those are outlined in the action, in the community climate action plan following the waste section. And as well, there are organizational leadership actions. Basically, what is being recommended is that Council adopt the Community Climate Action Plan and that Council embed climate action into the budget, establish a new staff position to oversee climate action, develop a climate adaptation plan that includes extreme weather responses and reviews and updates their corporate energy and emissions reduction plan. You know what I might do here is I am just going to share my screen. How about that? Would that be okay?
Yes, that's fine, Lisa.
Okay, because I did want council to see this slide. All right. Can you see the Pemberton Youth Petition on your screens now? Yes, okay. So I just wanted to remind council that almost 1 year ago, so March 19th, 2021, Mayor Richmond was presented with a climate action petition on behalf of students of the Pemberton Secondary School. And it contained 50 signatures and it contained the following asks, I would say. Basically, number one, improve transportation in and out of the community. Number two, students of PSS should get bus passes because for some, the $8 round trip free may be unaffordable. That the village should launch an educational campaign to try to get citizens to waste less food and buy more locally grown produce. That the village put up more water bottle filling stations around town, especially places where youth frequent. And number five, ensure that no old growth forest is logged within the community forest and lobby the provincial government for more old growth forest protection. And number six, put more recycling bins around town with separate bins to tell people what type of plastic to put in that bin. So I have endeavored to address almost every item in the Students' Climate Action Petition with relevant actions in the Community Climate Action Plan. So for 1 and 2, sorry, I can't read my notes right now because I'm sharing my screen, but you will see actions under Shift 2.1A and 3.1A and 3.1B with respect to improving transit and basically developing the potential for free transit days and basically exploring the idea of free transit. And that would be an amazing item to be able to offer students if we get there. In terms of their request for an educational campaign to waste less food and buy more locally grown produce, you'll see actions under waste 1.A and under food 1.A and 1.B around those items. And to put more water bottle filling stations, I haven't used that exact language, but there is language under waste 1.1B with respect to working on creating less waste and ensuring that no old growth forest is logged within the community forest. Well, unfortunately, that isn't within the village of Pemberton's ability to do that, but it might be something that we could communicate with the community forest. And there is some language under sequester 1.1a and 1.1b to that effect. And in terms of recycling, putting in more recycling bins, again, there is some language to that effect in waste 1.4a. So let me see if I can, how do I move to the next slide? I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, sorry. I just wanted to wrap up to basically let you know that as per the first page, the introduction of the Climate Action Plan, there are many co-benefits to undertaking climate action, which benefit our environment, our economy, and our social structures. So here's a graphic that outlines some of those co-benefits. And we really do, have an ability here to benefit our community at large by undertaking climate action. And now for that final slide. Basically, that was to wrap up. I don't know if Sheena, you could find that one and put it back up. I'm at a bit of a loss here. Oh, I found it. Here we go. So in terms of next steps, so obviously we're presenting the draft to Committee of the Whole today. If you had any suggestions for changes, it would be very helpful if you could itemize those for us. And if council is happy with the plan as is, there's a potential to bring that forward on March 8th for the consideration of adoption. And then we can move on to implementation, which really is a very, very key part of the planning process. So if you had any questions for myself or for Allison Jenkins, we'd be happy to take those now.
Lisa, can you take your screen down for me?
I sure can.
Thank you very much for that, Lisa. Ms. Jenkins, before we open up, did you want to go in there, or do you just want to remain available for questions?
Yeah, I think I'm just available here for questions.
All right, fantastic. Again, thank you for that. I'll open up. I know I have a number of questions. I'll open it up to council, the committee. Any questions on the report or the presentation? Councilor Craddock.
Thank you. A great report. It took a little bit of time to absorb it and read through it, but it was well put together. So just a few questions for clarification. Do we feel we've had enough community engagement on this report? I read the notes in there saying that you felt the feedback from who you had received information was enough to put this together.
Yeah, so the feedback that we received from the public at large was very helpful in order to prioritize some of the actions. And because the plan is made up of, it's quite technical when you get into the inventory, the modeling, the target setting, etc. There was a feeling that there has been enough engagement. However, if Committee of the Whole feels that this plan could benefit from more consultation with the public at large, then there is, an opportunity to do that. Allison, did you want to mention anything on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, we hosted, we did two workshops with stakeholders. There was a public open house, a public survey that all kind of fed into the development of the plan. And then as we worked through the draft process, several staff within the Village of Pemberton reviewed the draft plan. And then I know Lisa invited some local key stakeholders to review again. So I feel that there's been, sufficient public engagement, and certainly on par with what we would expect with other communities as well.
Thank you. If I might, Mayor Richmond, I've just got a few more items, if it's okay. Thank you. I did have a problem with the use of the word emergency, and I know you dealt with it quite well in your write-up, so we won't go into that, but I do have a problem calling anything an emergency. To me, that means it's dire, it has to be done today. And this is over the next 8 years, so I'll just throw that out there. One of the other things that comes to mind, did we look into any opportunity to see what the power supply would be available to make all these electrifications work over the next 8 years?
Allison, would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, the actions and strategies in the draft Village of Pemberton Climate Action Plan are very much in alignment with what other communities are doing and in alignment with the provincial Clean BC plan, which is expecting to see electrification certainly of passenger vehicles and a decarbonisation of heating systems for buildings. So yes, it's certainly in alignment with what's happening provincially. I can't speak to BC Hydro's individual plans other than to say that they say right now that they have a surplus of electricity, and there's a lot happening in terms of energy efficiency to kind of reduce demand. But the actions in the plan here around electrification of vehicles certainly align with what's in the provincial plan, the provincial Clean BC plan, and the Zero Emissions Vehicles Act, which basically requires an increasing percentage of vehicles to be electric vehicles as the years go by. So it's certainly in alignment with other communities and the provincial plan in terms of electrification.
Thank you. And the reason I asked that question, I know when the marijuana operations came to town, it was suggested they needed to have their own backup power plants because the local substation wasn't able to supply that commitment. So I'm just wondering, and that's Hydro's problem, maybe not ours so much as we move forward, the cost and upgrades available to do that over the next 8 years may be substantial. So just want to point that out. The only other thing that I'd like to mention is on page 59 under sequestration. On 1.1, you talk about preventing clearing of old growth forests. I think one of the things I've learned from being on the community forest and dealing with professionals there, if you put that out to people, you'll get 20 different people giving a different age on what is considered old growth. And I'm wondering if there's any way that we could add professional foresters' opinion on what that age is. I've heard 100, I've heard 150. And the only reason I'm doing that, because I know around the community and even letters we've been receiving lately, everybody talks about old growth forest, but when I ask people what their feeling is about that age, they look at me and say, well, you're kind of old growth yourself. So I guess if we could identify an age group, I think it would make it easier for us to talk to people about that.
Yeah, if that's something Committee of the Whole would like to see changed or added, a definition of what old growth is considered, then that's something we could look at doing.
Yeah, now I do understand that you said, like, in the village of Pemberton itself, that's not a huge concern for us, so to speak. It's a concern, but not so much. But it certainly is in our partnership with Lillooet Nation in Area C that we're doing forestry. So I think if we still put it in there, it would show that we're paying attention not just to ourselves, but to future old growth and replanting. So I guess I also look at the considerations of forestry of others special significance, which I understand. And then we go on to promote the building of houses with wood. So we got to be a little careful. On one hand, we don't want to reduce our allowable cut to the point that we can't use wood to build. But I think, again, I want to thank you both. A great report, and I appreciate reading it. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Allison, did you have any comment on the whole juxtaposition between using more wood but protecting forests at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, the sequestration piece really is the main focus of the plan is on the buildings, transportation, and waste. But we identify sequestration because we know that as we get towards 2050, it's likely that most communities and governments are going to have to use some form of sequestration to close that gap to get to net zero. And so that's why that's included in the plan here. But it's not something I think that we go into a lot of detail in the plan, and kind of admit that we are focusing on buildings, transportation, and waste. And I think, yeah, you're right. There is kind of have to be mindful there of what is our definition of old growth. And yes, we're saying to use wood frame construction because it has a lower carbon intensity, can even be net negative compared to, say, construction with concrete. And yeah, and I agree there's a balance there, but I don't think I have any more kind of detail to add really at this point in time.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess just the very last point here, Mayor Richmond, is I saw us including electrified scooters and bikes and stuff. Was there any thought about golf carts? So I'm just going to throw that out there. I see there's a number of people have mentioned that and said it would be a lot easier to haul groceries and take their kids when they go out for that. So I'm going to throw that out as a point of thought. And thank you for that. Thanks, Mayor Richmond.
Thank you. Councilor Noble, I'll come right to you. I just did want to comment on the old growth piece. I'll keep my other comments to later. But if we're going to add definition to old growth, I don't think putting a number on it simply in terms of years is the way to go. There's health aspects to forests, so there's some old growth that it's good time for it to be harvested, whereas second growth is actually bigger and healthier than some of that old growth. So what I've learned alongside Councilor Craddock, working with the foresters and on the community forest board, is that the definition of old growth is one thing, and then the examination of the ecosystem that old growth represents and whether it should be harvested, if and when it should be harvested. So I think it's really tricky if we're going to put wording in around old growth. I don't think we can blanket, we will never cut old growth. I don't think that's a reasonable approach. So I think we have to be careful on it. I support the protection of old growth for sure. I just think that there's other criteria that define what old growth should and shouldn't be cut. So with caution, that's all I say. Councilor Noble, go ahead.
Well, my mind was on the same thing, basically. I'm very intrigued by the definition of old growth. To me, it has never been a number of plain simple years, so much as a natural ecosystem that hasn't been changed and altered by man. So I would be very curious to see what an actual definition of that would be, not just in numbers.
Councilor Antonelli, go ahead.
We're on to comments now. Or are we still asking questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think I could weigh into that old growth discussion too. And the definition is tricky because I think if we ask, a professional forester to define it, then we're looking at parameters around harvest and forest productivity and financial viability and provincial regulations around cut requirements and all that business. Whereas my thoughts on old growth are more about ecosystem preservation. And that, if you ask the spotted owls what's meaningful to them, you'll probably get a different definition than if you ask the professional forester. So, whether we have to define old growth, right now or before March 8th, I'm not too sure, but I definitely want to stay away from concepts that limit it to what I was just talking about, like forest productivity and whatnot, and make sure we're reflecting the other half of the community that is more concerned about preserving ancient ecosystems. And other than that, I don't really have too many comments other than to say I'm amazed at how comprehensive it is. And I think, if we get this implemented, we'll be in good hands. I really think the adaptation piece is huge for Pemberton because of floods, fires, drought, preserving agricultural land, and it's really top of mind right now. So I hope we have some kind of plan in place for creating that adaptation plan.
Thank you. Councillor Zant, go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor Regan. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Drini. The presentation was fantastic. The amount of information that is in there is absolutely, it is very helpful. So thank you for all your hard work and staying up late most nights, I'm sure, to get this finished. But I have to agree with everybody here. I think we're in good hands if this scope moves forward. You've covered a lot of different bases here, which I feel is very efficient. I do have one question in regards to the curbside. It's more or less about organic pickup and reducing how much food waste and organic waste we put into landfills. I mean, I see that as a huge opportunity for the village to move forward with that. My only question is, it says curbside organic collection for single family home neighborhoods. And can I assume that's because some townhouse complexes are strata, and that's why it's single family houses? Because with the direction we're going with affordable housing, I feel we're going to see more townhouse complexes. All I'm saying is that it's just another avenue where we can reduce that waste. So maybe you could comment on that, and if there's an idea you had, because I know how much waste we go through, and we're a family of 4, and I just curious if you have a plan, or if you could comment on that for the townhouse, more dense areas in Beverton. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So in waste 1.2B, that's where you're referring to the action to work with the SLRD to consider implementing curbside organic pickup. But following that, in 1.2C is a complementary action, which is geared towards multifamily developments. And that is to work with the SLRD to install central collection points for organics that are regularly picked up for multifamily units or strata neighborhoods. So you may have just missed that next point.
Yeah, okay. I would guess, so that would come back to, I guess, cooperation with the village and the SLRD to figure out where those collection points would be then?
Well, a lot of stratas already do collect compost. Like I know a number of townhouse developments do have compost collection right now. So that's what that's speaking to, is just allowing for organics collection within their waste buildings that are on site. And so just for those few that still haven't, implemented that.
Okay. And would there, sorry, Mary, can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would there be within this, would there be an avenue for the village to, I guess what I'm trying to say is I know I'll say it straight, we don't have that at Cottonwood. So this is why I'm kind of asking the question. But are there incentives for the village to say to the strata owners of Cottonwood, it's like, hey, this is our climate action plan. This is what we could do for you to help you implement this.
Mm-hmm.
Are those incentives in place, or does the village have the powers to provide incentives to help other strata complexes that don't have it? Plus, unfortunately, I can't remember what the plans for the other complexes are going in, such as the one that's across the street. If they have those collections already in their plan with their with just regular solid waste.
The village doesn't actually have a waste collection division. The SLRD is in charge of waste management. So this action is basically working with the SLRD. So I wouldn't be able to suggest at this point, without speaking with Mayor Lou LeBlanc about what those incentives or how we would go about ensuring that multifamily stratas and strata neighborhoods could implement this action, but it would be definitely something we would work with the SLRD on.
Okay, so then Mayor Richmond, may I make another comment?
Go ahead.
Would that be something that a previous committee member could bring up then? Or would it be better to go through the SLRD themselves? Just curious about the direction to go. Maybe this isn't part of the conversation. We can talk about this later. But like I said, I think it's a great, I love your plan. I just kind of zeroed in on this because I can see there is an issue with certain, but some conflicts don't have that. So I'm zeroing in on that so I can say hey to the strata, maybe the other places
Right.
to promote it.
Well, currently, I do get contacted by the SLRD pretty frequently to see if the village is in a position or like has the capacity to and Nikki, maybe you could help me out, to basically take on more waste reduction or provide curbside pickup. And to date, the village just hasn't had that capacity, but I have been sitting on the SLRD's waste management and resource recovery monitoring committee for years now, and it's definitely something that comes up. The SLRD would love to see it implemented, but unfortunately, the village just doesn't have the budget and the infrastructure. Go ahead. Yeah.
I can just add one comment. This is obviously one action as part of this whole plan. And so once we get someone in place to be able to work through the actions of them, that sort of will be the responsibility of that staff member to bring it forward to council when we're ready to action it. And then we would get an official resolution, and then we would work with SLRD staff or whoever it would be with to action any of these actions in the plan.
Thanks to both of you. That answers my question completely. So, but thank you again, Ms. Petrunia. It's the amount of work I can see you put into this is top notch. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. So my thoughts are that I think it's a great plan. I think it's a very comprehensive plan and a very ambitious plan, which I also support it being ambitious. There's a ton of stuff in there in terms of implementation and actions. And so, and I know that's the next step, and I always like to jump to the next step. And I don't want to get too deep into implementation now, but in speaking to the process of how we implement, the recommendation is that we hire a community action staff member. I know Whistler, Squamish, and the SLRD have all done that to give them the capacity to move their actions forward. You look at the actions in the implementation, and some of them are underway. Some of them are things we're already working on. Some of the things will be spoken to through our OCP review process. We'll be able to capture some of that in there. So I guess when I look at all those great actions, and I think about implementing and prioritizing and what we can do with the capacity that we have, or what's underway, and what we need to reinforce, because 2030 is tomorrow, and the list of actions that are on there are not doable with the staff that we have right now. Again, some are on people's desks and some do belong in people's portfolios, staff members' portfolios as they're working, but there's other actions there. If we're going to hit these targets, I don't see how it's possible. So I guess in terms of the process, I'm wondering how we now prioritize this very large list of actions to understand it better, so that we understand how it fits into your staff's work plan and what needs to be supported. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
As a first part, I would think that, that's something we can bring back when we would bring back a few options for council when we look to adopt this plan, because I think in all reality, there needs to be some understanding that, as you just mentioned, we need someone dedicated in order to achieve some of these ambitious actions here. And, maybe we can lay out a small plan, but I think it would be, sort of next steps. I really don't see this person being brought on until near the end of the year or into 2023. But we can definitely have a conversation at a staff perspective. And Ms. Pedrini, if you have something more to add on that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so basically, I did take a stab at adding to the implementation plan that's attached in your appendices, where it mentions the lead for some of the actions. I did insert climate action lead because I wasn't sure what that position might be titled. So it was kind of a, we were rushing to get this out the door on Friday, and there was a few changes that I made in that section of the report, just like high level, which actions would be in this person's portfolio if a position was created. I realize now that one of the first actions that I assigned to that position was actually not correct. And that would be the ensuring that we, the land use planning portion of ensuring that we plan for compact, connected, and complete communities. That would actually be in the hands of the planning department or the development services department, and not necessarily the climate lead. But if you have a chance to look at the appendices, you'll see which actions definitely would benefit from having a dedicated person in that role.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I guess my concern, what I'm trying to get at is my concern is that you see a lot of it, like I say, some of this work is basically underway. Some of it will capture through different processes that we're going through. Some of it won't, and so that's why the recommendation for dedicated staff, and that's why you've made that list in the appendices. But I worry with the capacity that we have that, again, 2030 is tomorrow, so that this, many of these actions sit on the shelf, and which leads me to another comment, which is I believe that declaring a climate emergency is an important first step. I think it is an emergency. I think what we're seeing around us, the effects every year, there's loss of lives, there's loss of property. I think if you speak to people that have been directly impacted by flooding and forest fires and by lack of water, drought, they will tell you that it is definitely an emergency. So I think one of the first steps is to declare a climate emergency. I think that's something that should be brought back to us much sooner than later. And I believe that we should act accordingly because it is an emergency, and that we should take all the steps that we need to take to implement this very comprehensive plan. So it's laid out in front of us. I'm just concerned we're a small and mighty organization, but we don't have the capacity to push all this forward. And I know we're trying to keep taxes down and we're looking at staffing levels, but I just want to see this come back next week and the week after and the week after that to make sure that we are implementing everything we can implement. And if we have to put more resources behind it, we find a way to put more resources behind it. Our counterparts are doing this work. If we can do it in step with them, then we will be so much more effective. If we lag behind and watch the rest of the Sea to Sky make some of these moves, it's counterproductive, it's counterintuitive. So I think it's really important. And yeah, the emergency piece I think is real. One other thing that two other things actually, when you talk, Lisa, you spoke about updating the plan in 5 years, giving it tweaks. I would like to see as part of the plan and the actions we take that the update happens more frequently than that. I feel like technology and conditions are changing so rapidly that, opportunities would get lost if we waited 3 or 5 or even 3 years to update or look at it. And if there's no major updates, that's great, but I think it should be put in the bookmarked and put in the calendar that council looks at the climate action plan every 2 years to see what new emerging technology and solutions there are and crises there are. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I know this is focused on what we can do as a community to support the community in reducing our GHGs and et cetera. But I feel like the electrification of our own fleet and that work should be done as part of the plan too. I know we're not focused so much on our corporate emissions, and I know we do look at it in other ways that we can as an organization, but I think the electrification of our fleet is an important one. It should be one that's actioned sooner than later as well, because it takes a plan to transition from gas vehicles all the way through. It takes a plan, and you can't just do it. Okay, as of tomorrow, we're going to do it. And so I think that plan needs to be laid out, how we can make that transition as soon as we can. So yeah, that would be the bulk of my comments. I think it's a great plan. I think there's a lot in there. And I'm just leery. I just want to make sure we're finding every single way possible to implement. And I think we need to look at, as a council, the adding some resources to be able to support these actions. So those are my comments. Thank you. Anyone else? So at this point, we were the staff. You're looking for the input that you've received to bring this draft back. Maybe make a few tweaks as you feel what you've heard, and then to bring it forward to council for approval. Is that our next steps here? Or are you looking for something else from the committee at this point?
Well, I thought it would be perfect if committee of the whole could pass through a resolution, like itemize those suggested changes rather than
Okay.
just leaving it up to the recollection of the conversation.
Okay, so let's start putting together a resolution that directs staff to include the following items into the climate action plan. Following items or considerations into the climate action plan to be brought forward to council at a future council meeting. So I heard consideration of language around old growth forest. I don't know how to put that into words. Does somebody want to help me on that? I mean, staff, you heard the comments. It was about not having blanket statements on old growth and being able to.
I did hear the comments, although I don't feel like there was consensus on how to approach that item.
Okay, go ahead, Jed.
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think Clay Kindle put that in pretty good perspective when he wrote back to a person that was concerned about old growth. And I'm wondering if we could just check with him, because his idea wasn't so much about age of the tree, also it was about the eco part of it, and that some forests should be cut, some should be left. So I'm just wondering if I might suggest that we have a chat with him about maybe what he would suggest putting in there.
Go ahead, Councilor Noble.
I was going to suggest that we make sure we get a rounded definition that doesn't just go off of economic value, but the natural ecosystem value.
So that consideration around the ecosystems of the old growth. Yeah, this is going to be a tough one here.
Mhm.
I don't know, we want to wordsmith this all over. I think what we're trying to find as a council is not having a blanket statement as to not, I see next, Nikki, as to not have blanket statements as to cut or not cut old growth, but to define the balance between the protection of old growth and the ecosystems that they contain as a priority. In a sentence, I guess. Go ahead, Nikki.
Could this be an action item of the plan? Like, I think I think it's going to take more work than 1 week or 5 days in order to get the agenda out. We don't want to rush this, but maybe it's something as another item. It can come out as a result of this plan, and we just add an item so that I just don't think we're going to be able to capture. And I think that adopting this plan, which has a number of other actions outside of, I'm not trying to minimize old growth logging, but I'm just saying it could be something that's actioned later.
Everybody comfortable with that? Approach it that way? That way, like Jed says, we could speak with Clay and other foresters and get a little bit more information to him, how we want to action and develop policy around old growth. Is that good?
Yeah, I can see, I can envision what the language might be to cover that. And I mean, I'd also feels good because we would be addressing that concern that was included on the student petition. So.
Okay, so other direction in terms of the draft, like I say, for me personally, I like to see the electrification of our own fleet in the plan somewhere.
Mhm.
I'd like to see regular updates in there. I would like to see the declaration of a climate emergency be brought forward as one of the first pieces.
We would probably bring that forward next meeting. There's a number of items that we would bring forward that you've seen in this agenda that have a bunch of whereas clauses and resolutions, and we would see sort of those going hand in hand with the adoption of the plan.
Is there any other inclusions or exclusions that the committee would like to see in the plan to get brought forward? Okay, and again, in terms of the implementation and the resources required, that will be part of the upcoming conversations. Okay, so can I get a motion to include those comments for staff review to bring forward to council? That was a really clumsy sentence. Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again. It's great work. I'm so glad it's on the table and we're ready to move ahead on this. You know, we're a small town, but it doesn't mean we have to follow behind. We can lead on these actions and we can be that community. So thank you for bringing this forward and I look forward to the next steps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining.
I was hoping that maybe we could mention to, there's a number of people watching today. I know that we don't normally have a question period as part of a committee of the whole agenda, but so that they know that there is that ability to ask questions at the next regular meeting or comments or no, it's questions at the end.
So yeah, no, that's a great point. When this climate action plan is brought forward to council, on what date are we looking at, Lisa?
Well, I think it's very doable to bring this forward on March 8th.
Okay, so when this comes forward to council on March 8th, it'll be a public regular meeting. And at that time, anybody interested in asking questions on the plan will definitely have the ability to do so during our question period.
Great.
And to those that are on the line watching, please pass that information around so that more community members are aware of that. That would be great.
And I suppose if anyone had any particular questions in the meantime, they could contact me, email me at the village and I can assist if there was questions.
Perfect.
Great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Okay, I'm just gonna go back to the top. I believe that's it. Yeah, I will look for a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole. Moved by Councilor Noble, second by Councilor Craddock. Any opposed? We're adjourned. And we don't have to go back to regular, so we're all good for the day. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.